Hi folks, this is Ken Behrens with Tropical Birding, and today I'll take you on a virtual tour in search of snow leopard, one of the most incredible animals on Earth. This is something I did back in 2012. Keith Barnes was having a midlife crisis, and he recruited Scott Watson and I to join him on this epic adventure. Right around this time, snow leopard had gone from something that was almost impossible to find to something that was regularly being seen up in Ladakh in northern India. So it was far from certain in these days, but we decided to take a risk, and I basically went in with the mentality of whether or not I see it, I'm going to be happy, and I'm just going to enjoy these mountains because I love mountains, and these are the world's greatest mountains. So this is a bit of a trip report along with being a virtual tour. I've only done it once myself, but it's actually something that Tropical Birding now offers as a custom tour. It can be done with quite a bit more comfort than when we did it, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. This is very much of a quality over quantity tour. You're going for this one incredible animal. There's a few nice birds, there's a few other mammals, but this isn't the sort of trip for big listers who want big numbers. It's a bucket list kind of trip. Certainly was that for me. So here's the range of snow leopard, and as you can see, northern India is sort of at the center of its range. Here's India, North India, the Ganges Plain, here's New Delhi, and then the Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau. And so the area where you see snow leopard is up here in Ladakh, in the Indus Valley. So here's New Delhi again in the plains. You fly into New Delhi, and then you take a short domestic flight up over a big portion of the Himalayas, and you land in Leh. The flight up over the Himalayas is spectacular, and it makes you realize the true extent of these amazing mountains. And then you see the Indus Valley down below you, and you make this remarkable corkscrew landing in the airplane, where you drop out of the sky and you land in this restricted valley. It's one of the most memorable landings I've ever had on an airplane. Here's the airport. Leh is mainly a military town. There's a huge Indian military presence up there. This is where our group assembled. And we settled into a nice, comfortable hotel in Leh for a couple nights. You have to acclimatize to the high elevation there. You're only at about 11,000 feet in Leh, but that's still pretty high for most people. So you need to acclimatize, especially before you do any kind of trekking. A stylish, nice hotel. We had some time to wander around town of Leh. It's the lowest and the warmest that you'll get in this area, but it's still pretty cold. Lots of prayer wheels and stupas all around. This area is Tibetan Buddhist. So I like geography, so I'll give you a little bit of a lesson about the geography of that area. Down here you've got the Indian subcontinent, which smashed into Asia and created the Himalayas. And the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayas receive a lot of moisture, which flows down into the plains as a couple different rivers. And one of the big rivers is the Indus, which flows through the heart of Pakistan. You can see this is the Indus River Valley, and it comes all the way up here into the Himalayas, and so Leh is in the Indus Valley. Here you can see it a little bit more clearly. A big river winding all the way up here, and here's Leh. Well, the best birding in this area is actually along the Indus River. There's some sort of willow scrub along the edges of the river, and that's what it looks like. Start looking for some birds like brown accenter. Common things like Eurasian magpie. Beautiful white-winged redstart. And robin accenter. It's quite a common bird in winter here. The big prize of birding along the Indus during the winter is ibisbill. It looks like a river rock come to life with a big red bill attached. It's a great bird. Makes up its own family, which is a big deal for family listers. Quite nice looking in flight as well. Prayer flags draped everywhere. The Indus is also a good place for manly feats. Good part of a midlife crisis.
Mountain, man. We good?
Yeah.
Hey, still
Keith
won.
lost,
Ken wins,
but I think I cheated.
but he ran up further.
Yeah.
Well, here's the Indus Valley, and on this little range of hills that runs down into the valley, there's a spectacular monastery called the Thiksay Monastery. Here you can see it a little bit closer. That's what it looks like. When you climb to the top of that hill, you get these incredible 360-degree views of the mountains and great views of the Indus Valley as well. Here's the monastery itself, ancient Tibetan Buddhist monastery, full of mysterious iconography, very colorful. Prayer wheels. Some Buddhist monks. So after a couple days of acclimatization in Leh, we were used to the altitude, and so we headed down the Indus Valley and into Hemis National Park, which at that time was definitely the best place in the world to see snow leopard. Along the way, we stopped for some spectacular scenery, and then we trekked into this valley, entering the national park at the Xinchan Gate. As you can see, this is the site of our camp, and that gave access to several different side valleys, which are the best places to see snow leopard. So we said goodbye to our trusty vehicles and traded them in for some trusty mules. These guys just carried our bags and we walked in. Very rugged, very wild place, and very cold. It never got above 0 degrees Celsius or freezing temperatures there. So on the way into the valley, we saw our first mammal. This is blue sheep. Gives you an idea how it feels to see mammals in this environment. This is the major food of the snow leopards in this area. It's a good looking animal. Now a group had just spent about 2 weeks in this valley just before we got there and not seen a single snow leopard. So that was a bit discouraging. But finding fresh footprints of snow leopards was very encouraging. We set up camp. Those are the toilet tents. Our camp crew chipped a hole in the ice to get water. And we started to scan. This is pretty much the name of the game when you're looking for snow leopard, is that you scan. You scan these endless rugged mountains and you're looking for this incredibly cryptic animal that blends in perfectly with this environment and that doesn't move around a lot during the day. So we were pretty much resigned to scanning the mountains for 12 days and either seeing a snow leopard or just going home when we ran out of time. And we definitely had the attitude that if we don't see it, it's okay, but we're just going to give it our best shot. So we scanned, and then we scanned for a while. Scanned a bit more. And then we scanned. And then we scanned just a bit more. We didn't have it all that hard because the camp staff would actually bring up hot tea and meals, which really helped stay warm. Here we are having a tea break, eating some lunch. After lunch, we decided that we would scan a bit. And then we scanned some more. And then the sun began to set and it got even colder, and we called it a day. Of course, we hadn't seen a snow leopard, but that's what we expected. We thought it was going to take days and days, or maybe we wouldn't even see it at all. But when we woke up the next morning and were having breakfast, the lead tracker, called Jigmet, brilliant guy, came down and told us he'd been scouting early and had just found a blue sheep that had been freshly killed by a snow leopard. So this was great news. The leopard had only eaten a small part of the blue sheep, and we were quite confident that it would be back to feed. So we set up on a ridgetop that was about 500 meters, 500 yards from the blue sheep, and we started to scan again, although we had renewed vigor in our scanning. And after about an hour, Keith said something to the effect of, "I see the snow leopard," but there might have been a few South African swear words thrown in there. But he actually spotted the leopard, sitting up on a rock and basking in the sun, probably trying to digest its belly full of blue sheep. And eventually the leopard sat up, and we just got to soak in scope views of this incredible animal. Well, we pretty much knew that this leopard would eventually come down and feed on the sheep, but we didn't know when. So we sat on this little ridgeline for 9 hours waiting for the leopard to come down. I think it was the coldest day of my life, but it was also one of the best days of my life. I just remember sort of manically stomping and walking in circles and trying to keep the circulation going in my feet. And just before sunset, when it was already starting to get dark, the leopard climbed down from his perch and walked down the valley to come and feed. And it came into the blue sheep, and our friend Gilles managed to get this amazing photo as a digiscope. And Scott actually managed to get some video. I think he was so cold and he was so jacked up on adrenaline that his hands were shaking, which you'll see at the beginning of this video, and then he managed to steady. I know it's not a great video, but to me it communicates just the emotion of seeing this animal. And I still just get chills watching this video. There was a moment when the leopard was walking down the valley, when it seemed to be looking right at us. And I was staring right back at it with binoculars, and I'll just never forget those teal eyes staring at me. It was the #1 wildlife experience of my life. This photo is from Wikimedia Commons. It's not my photo, but it shows a little bit of that intensity in the eyes of these animals. What incredible creatures. incredibly thick, long tails that they use for balance when they're just bounding down these mountains to catch sheep and ibex. So as you can imagine, we had quite a celebration that night in our meal tent. The whiskey was nice and cold. Well, the next day we decided to do some birding. There's a handful of cool birds up in this valley, like the snow pigeon. Good name. And this was my most wanted bird, the white-browed tit warbler. Great little bird. And brown dipper. Himalayan snowcock. Well, at some point we were happily relaxing and birding, and one of our trackers started shouting, "Shan," which is a word in the local language for the snow leopard. And we looked way up a hillside, and we saw a snow leopard. Again, amazing. So we're watching this beautiful snow leopard, and then it starts to make this weird kind of mewing call, sort of. And we couldn't figure out why until we noticed something. This was a mother with 2 cubs following her. So we got to watch them climb up this incredibly steep slope.
Mother just climbed this. Can you see here?
These little cubs have to figure out how to go up these almost vertical cliffs.
Wow.
So later that night, we actually saw another snow leopard, and then that was the last one that we saw. But at that point, we had seen 5 different individuals, which made us the most successful group in history up to that point. We'd heard stories about camera crews that had been there for 3 months and barely managed any good footage. So the next day, we were going to head further up this valley to look for the world's biggest sheep called our gully. But a heavy snow fell. I only realized this when I woke up and I was way too warm, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized my tent was buried in snow. It's about 6 inches of snow, which made very good insulation. So we did the mature thing, and we made a snow leopard out of snow. Then we packed up and we headed out of this beautiful valley, met up with our vehicles, and then we headed further down the Indus Valley. We drove down, headed for the town of Yuli. That's the place now where everyone goes to see snow leopard. In these days, it was not nearly as well known, and we just decided to go there since we'd already had such incredible luck with the leopards. More stunning scenery along the way. This is a place where the Indus River meets the Zanskar River. The Zanskar is blue and the Indus is muddy. It's quite a striking spot. And for good measure, we decided to scan a bit. And our scanning paid off when we saw a couple of Ladakh urial, another big sheep. More snow leopard food. Sometimes along the way, along this drive, you can see Mongolian finch. So finally we arrived in the little village of Ule. You see it's in this big valley, and it gives you access to a bunch of side valleys. And this is really the place to see snow leopard these days. Things were not very developed when we were there in 2012, but now there are folks all around the area who keep an eye out for leopards, and they stay in touch. And if there's any sighting, then you shoot out in vehicles to see the leopards. This is Yuli. Locals even sell some wool souvenir snow leopards and ibex. So we set up our new camp, and right off the bat, we had an incredible piece of luck. Jigmet found an ibex that had just been killed by a snow leopard. And so we decided to stake out this carcass in the late afternoon and see if the leopard would come in. No leopard came in, but we did have amazing views of some foxes. And the next morning we came back to the carcass, and it was nothing but skin and bones. Because during the night, a pack of Tibetan wolves had come in and devoured that animal. But we were able to track these wolves up the valley and get some great views of them. Another fantastic animal and a great bonus. We'd had such great luck with mammals that we were just able to relax a bit and enjoy the Yuli Valley. Probably the most beautiful place I've ever been. Sunrises were incredible. Very rugged. These are some domestic yaks. Of course, we're professionals, so even though we'd already seen 5 snow leopards, our scanning was as focused as ever. Well, almost as focused. There were some great animals to see, like the ibex, another quintessential mountain animal. Cute little animal, the Royal's pika. Well, after another frigid night in the -15 temperatures, we realized that there was actually a homestay in Uli where we could stay. The name was a bit unfortunate, but that didn't matter. This place was paradise. Even had a nice little stove in the middle of the room where we can make a fire and warm up in the evenings. It's great for drying or roasting socks. Of course, we're always birding, and there's some cool birds up in the Yuli Valley, like the fire-fronted Saren, great rosefinch, black-winged snowfinch. It's a bit drab, but it's got a great name. And chukar, in a place where they actually belong. Chough is one of the common birds. You get both the red-billed chough as well as the alpine or yellow-billed chough. And they sometimes form these big mixed flocks. It's a member of the crow family, but a very unusual crow because they have these skinny bills. Patrolling the skies are lammergeiers, huge vultures that are famous as bone crushers. They carry bone way up in the sky, drop it, crack it open, and eat the marrow. That's their staple food. There's also Himalayan griffins, another huge vulture, and golden eagles. One of the major birding prizes is wall creeper. It's one of these cool birds like ibisbill that makes up its own bird family. And the coolest thing about wall creepers is their wings. They're really like avian butterflies. Well, for our last night, our amazing camp staff actually managed to make a snow leopard cake. We were sleeping in a homestay, but they were still cooking outside over a little gas stove. I don't know how they made this cake, but it was a nice celebration, along with the last of our whiskey. The next morning, we headed back up the Indus Valley to Leh. We spent one night there, and then we flew back to Delhi for the conclusion of our trip. Trip of a lifetime for all of us, a real dream achieved, something I never would have imagined I'd be able to see when I was a little kid watching that National Geographic special. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how searching for snow leopard works these days. You fly into Leh, you spend a couple days acclimatizing, and you visit monasteries and bird along the Indus, and then you drive to Uli. And you'd spend your whole time in Uli, and there's actually a nice little lodge there now. You can stay warm. It's simple, you have shared bathrooms, but it's a lot better than sleeping in a tent or even a homestay. The staff will even cook meals and bring them out and set up tables and chairs for you wherever you're scanning for snow leopards. So it's really a pretty luxurious experience. You're still at very high altitudes and it's obviously very cold, so this isn't a trip for everybody, but it is amazing how accessible snow leopards have become. Hundreds or maybe even thousands of people have seen them now. When Keith and Scott and I were up there in 2012, there had probably only been a few dozen foreigners who had ever seen a snow leopard in the wild. It's really become much more accessible. For folks who route through Delhi, you have quite a few options for other birding. One of them is Sultanpur, where you can see Indian courser, Indian eagle owl, or you can go to the Taj Mahal to see the Taj Mahal. Or you can go to the Chambal River and do boat rides for species like Indian skimmer or the world's coolest crocodilian, gharial. Well, that wraps up our virtual tour. Thanks for joining me in a quest for snow leopard. And a big thanks to my friends who allowed me to use their photos in this presentation. I actually didn't bring my big camera on this trip. I just wanted to focus on seeing this animal. Didn't want to carry the gear around. So they were able to fill in a whole bunch of photos for me. And I also used some great images that are on Wikimedia Commons. So thanks to all of those folks, and thanks again for joining me. Well, my son Rianala has been very tolerant of his dad doing this strange thing in front of the computer. So I promised him he could be in this video. Can you say, bye-bye, everybody?
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks. Good job. Good job.
Om ahum basa guru pema siddhi hum om ahum basa guru pema trinze basa samaya za siddhi phala hum om ahum sarva pensa amrita hum shi cha om ahum